Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. Carlota Sage is the founder and the community CISO for Pocket CISO, thrives in that squishy area where business and technology meet human nature and builds the relationships that get security, technology, business processes, and people working together better. And also has a background which includes architecture, enterprise infrastructure, information security, and knowledge management, and of course is a vCISO. Carlota, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So let's start from the beginning. You've got a very interesting path, and I know I love hearing stories about folks not only in their general IT and infosec path, but how they became a virtual CISO, which is
Sure.
definitely want to talk more about that. So, as they say in Genesis, let's start in the beginning.
Okay. I am actually a college dropout originally. I rectified that. But when I went back to school, instead of going into computer science, when I'd been doing web development for a couple of years by then, I decided that I would go into textile chemistry, which is the dyes and finishes, basically. My plan was to
Oh, okay.
be a manufacturing plant chemist. That's where I
Hmm.
wanted to be. I put myself through school doing the web development,
Hmm.
and I ended up as a research chemist for Cotton Incorporated, the look, the feel of the cotton. And for 8 months, I watched fabric dry. It was not very exciting. And I spent, actually, I
I
watched
can only
fabric get
imagine.
wet, you know. Yeah, I spent a lot of my time in that 8 months either rewriting research papers to be more clear,
Hmm.
or I spent a huge amount of time networking, and this would have been 2002, right? 2002, 2003, in that time frame, networking the lab equipment to automatically dump data into an Access database, right? So that we wouldn't have to write it down. We wouldn't have to stand by the machines and write it down. And after a few months of doing that, I thought, I should be back in tech. I am in the wrong space.
Hmm.
I loved research as a theory. Um, I am an extrovert, and being trapped in a lab was just it was hellish. So
I can only imagine.
so I landed a contract role with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services doing a large scale content management system migration,
Hmm.
and just found that I had a really great knack for information systems, and ended up in information architecture doing a lot of enterprise architecture. And then I decided I'd give a try in Silicon Valley, and fell into something called knowledge management, which is really aligning people, process, and technology for business outcomes, right? And in Silicon Valley in high tech, that's most often applied to support situations, to support
Hmm.
operations. And so I spent time doing help centers and knowledge bases for things like Netgear, Netflix. I advised Facebook for a few months on their help center. And then I took a little 6-week contract with a little startup, 350-person startup called FireEye, thinking I'm going to move back to the East Coast and I'm going to get the heck out of Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
And that was apparently a mistake, because I really loved it. I had a great time. I was on their IT team. I was doing program management. I kicked off their PMO,
Hmm.
program management office. And eventually, I ended up as the platform manager, the platform administrator for their content and collaboration systems. And at the time, they were using something called Jive Communities, which I can finally say that without twitching horribly. I mean, it's a terrible platform, but but the marketing person that they had hired to run the partner and customer communities was neither technical nor was he interested in security, from what I could tell. And he kind of pissed everyone off, and nobody would get out in the communities and answer customer questions anymore.
Hmm.
So I started answering his questions through chat, and he one day messaged me, "Hey, I can't find our IPMI product documentation." And I thought, "You didn't even Google that. You didn't even hit the internal search engine, because you would know that that's not a product if you had.
Hmm.
What are these questions in the communities?" And I got out into the communities, and I started poking around, and I ended up ending. I accidentally took over the communities, and grew the FireEye communities for 3 years from like 2,000 registered customers with a couple hundred active customers to about 10,000 registered customers
Wow.
with about 2,500 active customers. So that
Mhm.
was pretty good. And and I just loved it. I solved problems for security teams all over the world. And sometimes they were, sometimes they were product problems, and sometimes they were networking problems, where my background at Netgear came in handy. And sometimes they were security problems, just kind of general process and business process problems. Um, and sometimes they were, people who were just having a bad day and just needed to know that there was somewhere they could go, right,
Mhm. Right.
and have a sympathetic ear. And I kind of got addicted to that, but it was also very, very stressful and very high burnout, and I was the only one really dedicated to the communities, and it just had grown to a point where I couldn't do it anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and sadly for me, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer,
Mm.
and we had not had a very good relationship, and I decided I was gonna quit and really focus on family for a year. So I took a year off, best decision I ever made. Got to see my mother through her last days, got to get some quality daddy-daughter time, and then when
Mm.
I
Good.
kinda came out of that grief, I was like, I gotta do something, and I hung my consulting shingle out, and, the team that I had done my capstone at my master's with, I did eventually go back to school, obviously. I graduated, like I said, with a bachelor's in textile chemistry, but I
Right.
actually ended up in a master's program at Columbia in something called information and knowledge strategy. And
Mhm.
again, it's that aligning people, processes, technology for business outcomes, risk management reduction, risk reduction. Um, and that just has served me well, just the best experience ever. But, we did a group project instead of an individual thesis, and the team, the nonprofit that I had done my capstone with, found out that I was up for consulting, and since I had this background in content management systems and they did open source content management systems, I did a contract with them to kind of straighten out their product strategy, do some product review, actual technical reviews of their product, and I kept flagging security issues. And some really basic ones, like they'd roll back system patches because there was
Ugh.
conflict with, yeah, exactly.
My heart just fluttered a little bit there.
Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I can't even get the product to load without immediately having red flags, right?
So
Uh,
let's just, like, reduce the security. The people can't log in. Well, let's take off the permissions, just
right,
least
right. Like,
privilege, who needs it, you know?
right, all of this information is supposed to be public anyway, and that's
Absolutely.
fair.
We'll just
That's
make it more public, more
fair.
faster.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And so I actually went so far as to I kept telling them they need somebody to create a security strategy for them. And
Mhm.
because they were a nonprofit serving museums, libraries, and archives who never have money, right? They were a consortium. Um, the I started looking for CISOs in the university spaces, and I actually found them 3 or 4 really fantastic candidates that they could afford, and they just weren't comfortable enough. They didn't understand the need enough, right? But they trusted me. So their question was, well, could you just be our part-time CISO the way that you're kind of our part-time CTO at the moment? And I was like,
Right.
yeah, I can, because clearly I know more about security than you do. So so it was a really great, that's how I got into it. That was a really great experience. It was a great way to learn. Nonprofits really, especially nonprofits that are improving access to information, are always going to be near and dear to my heart. But
Mhm.
yeah, after a year of doing that, it's going into the pandemic. Everyone's tightening their belts. And I thought, okay, I should go find a real job now. I can't, I can't keep relying on this one client, right, to kind of be the bulk of my income.
Right.
Um, and that's how I ended up eventually at Fractional CISO, which is
Mhm.
also a virtual CISO firm. I don't know if you've ever had Rob Black on.
Actually, he was one of our first ones,
Ah,
yes.
yeah,
Rob and I, we go way back in the virtual CISO space.
excellent,
I think him
excellent.
and I first started talking, just comparing notes back in
Yeah,
2017 or
yeah,
2018. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Rob's fantastic. It was a great experience. My problem was that I was handling sales, I was handling clients, I was doing all of these, I was, mentoring the analysts, and right, literally the day before I was supposed to start at Fractional, my father sadly passed away
Oh,
very
I'm sorry.
suddenly of a heart attack. And I didn't take enough time off to kind of process that. And Rob was trying to give me as much time as he was like, you talk to me in 2 or 3 months if you need to. And I was like, I can't. I need to work. And, kind of with the pressure of the pandemic, I decided to go, and I loved working there. Rob and the team are amazing. But
Mhm,
in the long run, what I wanted to do is something that's less high touch. Rob serves clients that are in the 50 plus space, usually 150 to 250.
mhm.
And it's kind of a minimum, of 60 to 80,000 to get some time with Rob and his team. And I really believe in kind of moving back downstream. One of the ways I put myself through school was I would go to small mom and pop businesses and say, "Hey, for $500 in cash and $500 in store credit, I'll set up a website for you and show you how to
Right.
maintain it yourself." Because at the time, IBM in the Research Triangle Park area was charging $5,000 per page, and every product page was another
Ooh,
$5,000, right? It was a lot
ooh.
of money. Like,
Yeah.
a small business couldn't get a website for less than 15 grand at that time. But Dreamweaver and FrontPage existed. So it's
Right.
like, and so I wanted to get back to that, serving that very small business at a much lower price point. And I just couldn't do all the things with Rob and and build out this new model. So that's why I moved on.
And, it's never about the money,
Yeah.
for me too, a similar
Mhm,
arc in that, I just felt a calling to help small and mid-sized businesses who can't afford a full-time CISO.
mhm,
It's
mhm.
like, I mean, I like to say, and people probably get sick of me saying this, but if you have a heart of a servant, you'll always be successful, and that's exactly where
Right.
you're coming from, so I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah.
wonderful.
Thank
Now,
you.
you said something that triggered a memory in me that
Okay,
I'm
okay.
going to confess here on the virtual CISO
Okay,
moment for the
okay,
first
I'm
time.
all ears.
Actually, I may have already said this at some point in time before, but you were talking about, having dropped out of college and eventually
Mm,
going back, which is great.
mhm, mhm.
Um, I was expelled from 3 high schools in my career.
Was
I
that for
did
hacking?
no, no, no,
Oh, wow, okay.
it was, I did first of all eventually graduate in 4 years.
Okay.
But and it's a longer story, but basically I was a nonconformist, if
Mhm,
people can believe
mhm.
that. And I was is one of many vice principals that I ended up talking to in my high school career said it's just like basically he was saying it's like I'm too smart for school. School bores me. And I'm like, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, I was
yes,
right. I'd rather go out and
yes,
hang out with my friends, you know? It's like
yes, absolutely.
I don't know why they were in school, but that was another story. So
Yeah,
you see a lot,
yeah.
certainly in the virtual CISO space, both working with Fractional and now
Mhm,
through Pocket CISO and working, with the particularly the smaller of the smaller
mhm.
SMBs. What would you say and I'm smiling because of our pre-talk conversation. I'll explain it. So the question is, what do you think is a significant threat to small and mid-sized businesses today? And I had jokingly said before recording that anything related to Silicon Valley Bank is off limits, but I will not put it off limits. So what do you think is a significant threat today?
I think the biggest is just a lack of understanding, the lack of knowing who to turn to, the lack of education. Um, and I
Mhm.
think for a very small business, a mom and pop business or a 2 to 10 person startup, just knowing where to go to get started. There's NIST. We know that as security people. Um, there's the Small Business Administration, which has kind of some vague information out there, but there's not. I feel like there's not a good help center, for small business, and that's really what I'm looking to build. I want to take a much more of an educational approach, so that a lot of the information that I'm going to be putting out there. I was supposed to release my help center last month, but I took a month off in the Philippines and haven't quite launched the help center yet. But um, Yeah, a lot of that information is gonna be free for them, just so that they have a place to go that is really trying to demystify that security language and that technical language, and kind of
Mhm.
give them the information they need from a business perspective, and then how to look for, where to look. I will be linking to, for example, SPIF, DKIM, DMARC, right? I'm linking to Google stuff, and I'm linking to Microsoft stuff, but I can find it because I'm really good with Google. My search foo is strong because I've got that background.
Search
But
foo.
but a
Or
lot
or
of
I guess you could call it goo-foo.
Goofoo, or it could be the duck duck foo. I don't know. So
Oh, okay, I'm going to add
yeah,
that to my lexicon of, stuff, my mm,
yes,
that's awesome.
yes,
Okay, oh, I'm sorry,
yes.
go ahead.
No. It's yeah, I just wanna give people a place where they know they're gonna get information that's written for them.
Mhm.
That's really, I'm not trying to talk down to anyone, but, at Netgear, for example, I served very technical customers because they have enterprise products, and I served very non-technical customers because they have home products as well, and I think that we're missing that home product kind of side of things in security.
That's awesome, that's awesome. Well, I know, um, certainly, um there's just a whole variety of threats
Mhm.
for small and mid-sized businesses across the
Mhm.
spectrum. I'm still kind of a little bit stuck. I know I said I wasn't going to talk too much about it, but I think
Sure.
it is important for folks to realize. I talked about it on the podcast this morning,
Mhm.
the quick strike that obviously whenever something big happens in the
Mhm.
infosec in the
Mhm.
world,
Mhm.
that look for phishing and all that stuff as well
Mhm.
too. So
Mhm. Yeah.
well, being an entrepreneur and being in infosec and all of this stuff,
Not
and
stressful at all.
and I can also attest being a podcaster and we had a little bit of a recording glitch in the middle of this, and I hope that it continued. This is
We'll
usually
find
whenever
out.
we'll find out. I think it's still going fine, but all of that can be really stressful.
Yes.
So what is one thing or a couple of things that you do to kind of decompress, get away from the stress
Oh,
and get some sort of balance?
my favorite thing to do is, it'll sound ridiculous, build and destroy cars, or mostly destroy cars. I like to take things apart. They don't always go back together. Sometimes they go back together, and sometimes I can even get them running. So I've got at the moment 5 cars total. 3 of them are running.
Hmm.
So that's good. And I'm about to kick off a project to put an RX-7 engine into a 1990 Miata, 91 RX-7
Oh wow.
rotary engine into a 90 Miata. So that's going to be, replacing an engine is just work. And so a radical engine replacement is just more work, right? So
Right.
that's one of the ways that I kind of keep myself balanced. I just like to make things. I make a lot of jewelry. I take old worn out toys and clean them up and repaint them and regift them. If I see something that just I feel like it has some use left in it, I will find a way to use it.
I have in my past done something similar, take apart things and put them back together. And
Mhm.
sometimes what ends up happening is that I've got a couple of things left over, and I'm like, Where did these things come from?" And then I'm like, "Well, the thing seems to be working, so I guess it's okay."
Right, exactly.
And it always scares me. So that I remember one time, the first time I think I was working on brakes
Mhm,
on my car. I was
mhm,
replacing like a rotor, and there was
mhm.
something. I think it was like a spring clip actually that was
Right,
left, and I had the foresight to actually go back in and like, okay, what did I miss? Because
right.
brakes
Kind
missing
of
something.
important. Mhm,
Yeah, yeah,
mhm,
yeah. I might
mhm.
not be here today if I hadn't made that decision. So.
I've made a similar decision, actually the opposite direction. I was upgrading I have a what's called a 1988 Mazda 323 GTX. It's a
Hmm.
very rare little car. The 323s in the late 80s were just little Econobox hatchbacks with a single overhead cam engine.
Hmm.
And the GTX is a dual overhead cam engine. It's the Miata engine mounted transversely, and it's mated to a four-wheel drive. Y- anyway, you can't get the parts for it. They only made 2,400 of them. and the parts
Ooh.
for this car are unobtainium, and so you end up kind of figuring out what other lines of Mazda or other Japanese cars where you can kind of scavenge things. And I'd scavenged the rear struts from, I think a Protege or something,
Do you have
and
to do
the
like a Carlota, modification on it?
yeah,
Like, you know, cut
you
off a
get
little bit
you
here,
know,
weld a little thing there, you know?
it's a lot like security in our
Yeah, you bolt it
car,
on,
right?
you
Like,
know?
I'm gonna see how well I can get this to fit, right? And, that's close enough. It'll do the job, right? And, but the clips for the, brake line were in a different place, and I missed a clip, and my brake
Uh-oh.
line rotated around and rubbed against the tire, and I sprung a leak in, uh, traffic. Great, 5 p.m. traffic on 880 North in, San Jose. Is it 880? Maybe it was
Oh.
101 North. It was not pretty, basically. No, it was
But you were
880
able to
North.
stop okay?
I got very lucky, and there was a very long off ramp, and I was
Ah.
able to coast and get to a breaking point. And I called a friend of mine, and as I'm talking to her, she goes, "Please tell me that you are not duct taping that brake line right now." And I was like, "I am not duct taping that brake line right now," because I had already duct taped it, and I was actually zip tying it at that particular moment. And so because
That's
I'm
awesome.
calling around to all of the auto parts stores and nobody has this brake line until 2 days later. So I had to make the brake line I had work.
I mean, yeah, you had to get out of there, but
Right, right.
well, I can imagine that would have been pretty scary. So
Yeah.
outside of, like, taking apart and rebuilding cars and hopefully remembering
And
to
trying not to kill myself.
put everything there and not kill yourself, what are some of your future plans? Like,
Yeah,
whether it be personal or for Pocket
sure,
CISO or
sure.
both?
Pocket CISO, I'm definitely I'll be at the Small Business Expo in New York at the end of June, and I'll get to
Oh,
talk to
okay.
some small business folks there. So I'm really looking
Mhm.
forward to that. I'll be launching the Help Center either later this week or next week, and then I'm just treating that, like I said, like an educational cohort. So to bring that price down, if folks just want that education, I'll be doing little classes and kind of moving people through doing more do it yourself kinds of things on the policy side, and just giving them that education. And then they'll have me on retainer. And then at some point in the next year or two, I hope to at least spend half my year in Australia and the Philippines with family. Um, and we'll see how that goes. I got to get Pocket built up to a point where I can bring in one or two other vCISOs, and then I can kind of take that step back and really focus on family again for a little bit.
Well, if you ever wanna talk a little bit of strategy with regards to
I
that, I mean,
can,
certainly,
yeah.
that's usually the way that a lot of folks build the virtual CISO business, and,
Hmm, hmm.
um, it's an interesting way to go along. In fact,
Yeah,
on YouTube,
yeah.
my YouTube area, which is, YouTube/ampersand vCISO, I'm doing
Okay.
a small series
Mhm.
on, being a cybersecurity consultant, and I'm getting to
Oh,
the point right now,
great.
I'm looking at the board over here of my
Uh-huh.
topics,
Mhm.
of, like, growing it past and
Right,
bringing folks in,
right,
so
right.
yeah, back in
Yeah.
the day when Rob and I first talked, I think it was just him with fractional and just me with a V,
Exactly,
so
exactly, and Rob, I took the role with Rob over, because my network so much of my network is in the cybersecurity product vendor space,
Mhm.
and I actually was on my 3rd interview with a really hot startup that has done extremely well. I would have really cashed out well if I had gone with them, but I just felt like I could learn so much about business from Rob, and I was
Yeah,
not wrong in any way.
yeah.
And I wish him nothing but the best. He was a fantastic boss, and anytime anyone has a chance to go work for Rob at Fractional, I definitely would say go do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Well, thank you, Carlota, so much for
Absolutely,
joining us today, and it has been a
absolutely.
fascinating conversation. I laughed more than I usually do. I
Good,
learned more, and I'm gonna be a
good.
little worried about when I get in my truck after this. I'm not gonna go too fast because 'cause I'll be thinking about brake lines, so
Oh,
thank you
okay.
so much for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me join you. It was great, Greg.
And everybody, stay secure.